your love for Jesus is not what it ought to be. God is still calling you. I'm really glad you're joining me today. And I'm Steve, and we're talking about the Bible and about Jesus, the person who we love the most. And the question that I want to address today is this question that people have asked me who have been called by God to do something powerful, something special in the world, and then they mess up and they realize that they've let Him down, and therefore they have disqualified themselves for the thing that He called them to do. And I think we all know that feeling. Like, God, I'm not as good as the person you called me to be. And so there's a point where we feel like I'm just giving up. And if you remember, there's a verse in 2 Corinthians 7:10 that says, godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. Now, there's two kinds of sorrow. Sorrow that says, man, I messed up and I'm so sorry, Lord. And He says, you're forgiven. And you move on. And there's another kind of sorrow that says, I'm so stinking bad. I hate myself. I hate myself. And you keep beating yourself up. And the devil's saying, yeah, that's worldly sorrow. And what that verse says is that that leads to death. Not just your death, but the death, the potential death of people that you could have reached had you not given up. So here's what I want to remind you. God is still calling you. Now, think about the people in Scripture who failed. There were a bunch of them. But think especially about the one guy who really messed up by telling people that he didn't even know Jesus. Remember Peter? The night before Jesus is put to death, just before Jesus is betrayed, Jesus says, you guys, my friends, you guys are going to all abandon me. And Peter says, no way. Now, if you'd asked Peter at that point, Peter, do you love Jesus? Do you have agape for Jesus? Remember, agape means that kind of love that you'll die for somebody. He would have said, absolutely. Jesus, I'll die for you. Remember? That was Peter's attitude. And you fast forward a couple hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and there he is sitting next to the fire. And people are like, hey, you're with him, aren't you? And you remember what he's saying? He's like, I don't know that guy. I don't even know him. And he totally denies his Lord. And you remember what happens? The rooster crows, and Jesus looks at him from across the courtyard. They make eye contact, and suddenly Peter realizes his sin. He realizes what he did. And you remember what he does? He's heart-stricken. He goes out and he cries. He realized that he had just denied his close friend. He realized that he wasn't loving Jesus the way that Jesus deserved. And so what happens? Remember, Jesus gets killed. And Peter's so broken over it, so upset. Well, Peter does see Jesus when Jesus comes alive. But Peter is still broken. And so what does he do? Well, fast forward a few weeks, and he's gone home. He'd left his business a few years earlier to follow Jesus. And yeah, Jesus is alive again, and he's happy about that. But he's disqualified himself now in his mind. And he's gone back to Galilee, way up in, how many, 3-4 day walk from Jerusalem. And he's going back fishing. In fact, not only is he going back fishing, but he's taking his friends back. And so we're looking at John 21. This is what John 21 says. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, Lake Galilee, it's also called. And it happened this way. So Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel gives a list of the people who go fishing, who are together. Peter says, I'm going out to fish. And they said, okay, we'll go with you. In other words, you see what's going on? He's going back to his old business. He hadn't been fishing in how many years? But in his mind, the story's over. Kingdom building, it's not going to happen the way he thought it was. So He's going back to fishing. So they went out of the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. You think God had something to do with that? God wasn't going to let Peter go back to that old life. Verse 4, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. But the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. And he called out to them, "Hey, friends!" He's calling over the water. It's kind of misty. It's still dark. It's barely light. "Hey, friends, you got any fish?" No, they answered. Okay, I grew up on the shore. I grew up in a little village in the Philippines. And every morning we were hoping that people caught fish. Because if there was fish, if people caught fish that night, we had something to eat. If they didn't catch fish, we were hungry. So we'd go down to the shore and we'd do just this. We'd be calling out, "Any fish?" And we'd be looking for people who were coming in with a load of fish, hoping that we could buy some so we'd have something to eat. That's what Jesus is doing. At least he's pretending to do that. So he calls out, "You got any fish?" And it's no big deal there. But then he says something really strange. And he says, they say, no fish. He says, "Throw your nets over on the other side over there." So they obeyed. They don't know. But I think whoever this guy is, he must know. So they throw their nets on the other side. And there were so many fish that they were unable to haul them in. And then the disciple, verse 7, the disciple that Jesus loved, that's John, the guy who's writing, he calls himself the disciple Jesus loved. He says to Peter, "That's the Lord. That's our master." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him and he jumps in the water. He's gone back to his old business, but he still loves Jesus, at least imperfectly. He jumps, he's so happy. He gets to shore. The other disciples followed, towing the net full of fish, for they weren't far from shore, about 100 yards away. And when they landed, they saw a fire burning with coals, fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Man, if you've been out fishing all night, it is great to have some fish for breakfast. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore, and it was full of fish, 153. I'm not going to tell you what's significant about that number, but you try to figure it out. But even with so many fish, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, same thing he says to you, "Hey, come have breakfast. Let's eat together." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" What does that tell us? Well, if you read in Isaiah, I think it's Isaiah 50, it says that he was unrecognizable because of what had happened. So he was hard to recognize because of the way his beard had been pulled out. He'd been pounded. And so they're having trouble recognizing him. But they knew it was him. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them. He did the same with the fish. Now, verse 14, this was now the third time Jesus had appeared to them after he'd been raised from the dead. Now, this is the part I want to get to. Verse 15. So they ate breakfast. And Jesus says, "Hey, Peter, come on. Let's go for a walk. Got to have a little conversation with everybody else listening." Start walking. He says, "Hey, Peter." Actually calls him Simon, his old name. "Simon, son of John, do you really love me more than these guys?" Because he claimed he loved them more than those guys did. It's like, "You love me more than this?" And Peter says, what does Peter say? Look at it. I know all of you say that he says yes, but there's a secret here that you miss when you read English. If you read it in Greek, you find out that the word that Peter uses for love is not the same word that Jesus used. What Jesus had asked is, "Peter, do you agape me?" Remember what agape is? Agape means the kind of love that you'll die for somebody. It's the kind of love that doesn't feel good. It's the kind of love that's painful for you. And Peter's response is, "Yes, Lord, you know I phileo you." What's phileo? It's fondness. It's friendship, maybe. So Jesus says, Peter, you love me enough to die for me? And Peter's like, yeah, you're my friend. But he can't use the word agape because he knows that he just proved a few weeks ago that he didn't love Jesus with that kind of love. But here's what Jesus says. And what Jesus says to Peter, he's saying to you, feed my lambs. You know what he's saying? Essentially, Peter, your love for me isn't the kind of agape love yet. But I still got a job for you to do. I still called you to feed my lambs. Don't give up. They walk a little bit further, verse 16. And Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? And again, he uses the word agape. Do you have a love for me that'll cause you to be willing to die for me? And Peter answers the same way. Yeah, Lord, you're my friend. But he can't use the word agape because he knows it hasn't been true. But look what Jesus says at the end of verse 16. Peter, take care of my sheep. Again, whatever you've done, whatever you've messed up, there's still sheep to feed. There's still a job to do. Just because you messed up does not take you out of the game. Get back to work. They walk a little bit further. Look what happens. Verse 17. The third time, Jesus says to Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And here's the crazy thing. This third time, he doesn't use the word agape. He uses the word phileo, the word friend. In other words, this third time he turns to Peter and he says, so Peter, am I really your friend? Am I really? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him this third time, am I really your friend? Do you really phileo me? Do you really phileo me? Am I really your friend? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that you're my friend. But he can't bring himself to say agape because he knows it isn't true. But Jesus doesn't mind because he still says, feed my sheep, Peter. Stop going back to your old fishing. I still got a plan for you. We're still going to build a kingdom. Feed my sheep. Then he says something in verse 18 that you got to catch, and it's easy to miss. Verse 18, he says, Peter, I tell you the truth. And when Jesus says, I tell you the truth, you know he's telling the truth, because he always does. So he's really emphasizing this. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you're going to stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. That's weird. But verse 19 says Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, follow me. What's that all about? Peter, do you love me? I like you. Peter, do you love me? I like you. Peter, do you even like me? Am I really your friend? Jesus, I know. You know everything. You know I'm your friend. Feed my sheep, Peter. But guess what, Peter? When you were younger, you did what you wanted to do. You lived for yourself. But there's coming a time, Peter, when you are going to get to die for me. Your love for me right now isn't that agape love. But guess what, Peter? The story's not over. There's coming a day where you're going to love me so much that you're going to get a second chance, and you will get to die for me. And what happens? That happens. There's a day that comes 34 years later, 32 years later, when Peter dies for Jesus, victoriously. His love for Jesus, he finally proved he loved him with agape love. What does this say to you? Your love for Jesus is not what it ought to be. But guess what? The story's not over. Your love for him is still developing. And he is faithful to complete in you what he started. There's coming a day. Don't give up. There's coming a day when you are finally loving Jesus the way that he intended you to love him all along. Don't give up. Don't go back to fishing. Don't go back to your old life thinking that you've been disqualified. His call on your life is still there. He's working in you. He's preparing you for more. The story's not over. Don't forget that. So glad that you're with us. If you've got any questions or any other issues you'd like me to address, you put those in the comments below, and I'll try to address them in subsequent